Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled to be talking today with David Nielson, the author of Nine Dimensions of Conscious Success. And as you come online today, we would love to hear a little bit about you. We'd love to know where you're calling in from. For example, we were talking a little bit about the weather before we started this broadcast, and it's very cold here in Michigan. It's cold where David is in Indianapolis, Indiana. So go ahead and find your chat panel. We would love to hear you say hello and tell us where you're calling in from. And please, if you're going to talk to us in the chat, make the selection to chat to all panelists and attendees so that your fellow participants can find out about you as well. So welcome to everyone. We are going to get started in just a few moments. We are also broadcasting live today on Facebook and recording today's session. So welcome in Detroit, in Orange, California, in Phoenix, Arizona, in Tulsa, in Grand Rapids, in Washington, PA, Minnesota, Boston, balmy 19 degrees. It's the same in Indianapolis, Indiana, where David is today. So welcome to all of you who are choosing to invest and learn with us today. A couple of technical considerations for today's event that I want to make sure you know about. One is the chat. We would invite you throughout today's event to chat to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can interact with you. You can type your questions into the chat, and toward the end of the call, we will be asking and answering some of the questions that you have on today's topic. As I mentioned before, we are recording today's session. That recording will be available to you. And we will also make a PDF of today's slides available to you as well. And so as we begin today, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to share a poll, and we want to invite you to participate. We're super curious about what generation you represent on today's poll. And so if you could take a quick moment and share with us which of these generations you represent. If you would rather not share, no problem. I will proudly say that I am a member of Gen X, and I'm going to be shy about my age. So thanks to those of you who are answering our poll, and we will share those results in just a few minutes. While we wait for some of those results to come in, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists today, our presenter, David Nielson. David is an internationally recognized speaker and facilitator, and he has helped guide large-scale change initiatives and business strategy with his clients around the world. He's been a featured and frequent speaker at PMI, Project World, Chief Executive Network, Management Resources Association, and a number of other organizational events. And David is the author of a new book called The 9 Dimensions of Conscious Success, and that book is the topic of our conversation today. So I am going to go ahead and end the poll, thanks to those of you who have voted. And I'm going to share those results with you. It looks like 62% of you are baby boomers today. 30% of you are Gen Xers, like me. We have a small percentage, 7% millennials on the call, and only 1% of Gen Z on today's call. So thanks so much to those of you who have shared. David, what do you think about those results?
Well, I'm fascinated. First, I am a member of the baby boomer generation, and so glad to see such great representation. One of the great learning points about this book, as I worked on writing it and then publishing it, is that my original intent would be that it might be a guide for younger people entering the workforce, brand new, and my intent was to help them learn from some of the lessons that I had learned, in some cases the hard way. And even the publisher has helped identify that some of the people, we are getting some of the younger generations, but some of the people that seem to be buying the book are baby boomers. So I'm thrilled with that.
Well, great. Well, I'm really excited to dive into our conversation today, David. And I know that one of the first things that we want to do is look at the model that you created in the book to describe these 9 dimensions of conscious success. And I'm going to make the assumption that most of the folks on the call have not had exposure to the model. So could we talk for a few minutes about the model, and you can explain it to us? And then in the book, you do talk about these 6 differentiators for success, which include humor and authenticity, gratitude, articulation, listening, work ethic, and personal responsibility. And I'm curious, David, if any of these are more important than the others, or if they all hold equal ground.
Well, probably the easiest way to describe this is that the model is intended to build on a foundation of the three inner circle items: purpose, self-awareness, and social awareness. And that really forms the foundation, and there's a close linkage between those and then the six differentiators. So I would say that the three elements of the foundation are very, very important to build on what you're trying to do in life and where you're trying to go. Of the differentiators, I would say probably in my mind, authenticity is the most important because it helps drive the others. When I started framing what this book was going to be about, I had an idea of what I thought the important critical success factors were, or what the success dimensions were. But I realized that a focus group of one was not very, I mean, my opinion might have mattered, but I wanted to seek help from others. And so I did a bit of research. I interviewed close to 50 people on what they felt was important in success. The questions that I asked, by the way, are indicated in the book, and all the data is in one of the appendices at the end of the book. And so really what you see here, the 3+6, is a reflection of not only my initial thoughts, but also the data that I received by interviewing. But I would say focus on the foundation, and then authenticity becomes the most important of the differentiators.
That's helpful, David. Thanks. So in the book, you define success as the accomplishment of an aim or purpose. And so let's talk a little bit about the importance of purpose in the model and in the work that you do.
Sure. I believe it was Will Rogers who said the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you figure out why. I love that quote because as I have worked with not only the book, but thinking back on my career, I used to do a lot of academic and career counseling in one large corporate organization. And one of the starting foundational questions always was when people wanted to get advice on their career, one of the starting point questions was always, well, where do you want to go? Where would you like to see yourself, or what kind of a position would you like to have? And of course, as we talked with individuals, there were a wide variety of answers. Some people had no idea what they wanted to do with their life. Some thought that they knew, and in the exploratory phase of those discussions, they would sometimes say, yep, I'm even more convinced, or sometimes they would decide, no, I really need to take a different path or a different direction. So starting with what you want in life guides your ability to do so many things. It allows you to make better career choices, better choices around companies that you want to work for. It allows you to be clearer about the kind of development that you want to seek, to really identify. So if I'm trying to achieve this level of success or this definition of success, now I know more clearly how I might approach that journey. So really, the purpose, it starts with figuring out, what do I want in my life? And I guess a key footnote to that is one of the things that we talk about a lot in the book is success. And it's critically important that success be defined by the individual. Nobody can really define success for each of us. It's a very personal choice. And I highlight in the book that it has nothing to do with wealth or the attainment of assets or rising the corporate ladder. Success is what you deem it to be. And once you have defined that, then aligning a purpose to what your success definition is a good starting point.
Well, and David, it occurs to me that the folks on the call might have their own definitions of success already. And so if, as you're participating today, you want to share that in the chat with our panelists and attendees, if you do have a definition of success already for yourself, we would love to hear and see that. So if you want to take a moment to share that with us, that would be really interesting, I think. And I'll read those out as they come in, David. I wonder, going off script for a moment, David, if you could share with our attendees what your definition of success is.
My success, my personal purpose, well, let me separate those out. My definition of success was really based on some work I did on myself a lot of years ago, which was to create the balance of having meaningful work, meaningful play, and a meaningful relationship in my life. That's what success would have been for me. And my purpose statement is ensuring that my best self shows up to help individuals and organizations achieve their best purpose. So the success, of course, is my success definition is broader around the balance of things that have to do with work as well as other personal things in my life.
So we do have a few people who have responded. One person said, how many people I can serve and impact, success at peace with my personal and professional lives, making a positive or guiding difference in the lives of others, making a difference in the world based on my life purpose and experience, and being in a community of love. Thanks to those of you who are sharing.
Yes, thank you. Those are great.
And if you want to share more, we can always read out some of those. It sounds like we have people on this call who are definitely wanting to make a difference. David, I don't know if we want to move now to talking about the personal purpose statement, or if we want to ask those poll questions about the personal statement. Do you have a preference about
Let's
which
ask the
first?
poll and find out. It's not an obvious thing for a lot of people. So let's run the poll, and then I'll talk a little bit about the personal purpose statement.
Okay, that sounds good. So just one second. So we have a couple of different poll questions that we want to launch right now related to personal purpose statement. And we're curious today, do you currently have a personal purpose statement, and do you try to complete a personal improvement process each year? So as I launch that poll, you have 2 questions to answer. And as you're answering, I'd be happy to share some more of these success definitions that are coming in. So one more came in service, adding value to others as they grow as leaders, and adding value to society. And that came in from John. Thank you, John. Success, knowing your qualities, self, and using those skills and abilities to improve self and life of others.
The nice thing about Cynthia's there that you just read is that ties very closely to the whole notion of sort of self-awareness and social awareness. So it starts with some of those foundational elements.
So thanks to those of you who are answering the poll. I'm going to give another couple of seconds on that and then share those results with the group. And some pretty interesting results coming in. So thanks to those of you who have voted. Let's take a look at those results together. Of the people on the call, 58% do not have currently a personal purpose statement, and 36% do not try to complete a personal improvement process each year. 64% of you do. So thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts on the poll. And David, let's talk about why having a statement is so important, and how you can go about beginning to create one.
Sure. One of the things that I've learned, and it may be a reflection of my generation, the baby boomers, I continue to work on being able to use technology as an effective tool in my life. But of course, based on my generation, I grew up, being a writer. We were taught writing. We learned cursive, which I'm not sure they're even teaching in school anymore. And what has been interesting is the recent research that talks about learning and retention and so on and so forth, that there's something quite powerful that connects between sort of the brain function as well as the motor activity of writing, that writing things down actually enhances the ability of people to be able to recall and retain those things. And so there's kind of a powerful relationship between, sort of pen or pencil and paper and thinking and so forth. So I found that the actual activity, and I talk about how to build a personal purpose statement in the book, and there's a step-by-step process in the appendix, that the process of sitting down, reflecting, writing it down, living with it for a while, sharing it with others, the importance is it becomes more real for individuals, I believe, and you're more likely then to to see it as something that's important in your life. Secondarily, then the reinforcement piece of it is being able to post it in a place where it is a constant reminder for you, and being able to let people know what that is. being able to, I call it, sort of going out on a limb, because once you've gone public with what your purpose is in life, it creates expectations with people. It also creates a support mechanism where people will help you achieve that purpose.
Yeah, that's really powerful, David. And I was just thinking about that whole idea of setting expectations. If you share with people what your purpose is, then they're likely going to hold you accountable to living that out. Have you seen that to be true in your life?
I have, and the other thing it allows with close relationships and high trust relationships, it isn't always fun to get feedback, but it's useful to get feedback if people see you not living your life on purpose or in conjunction with the purpose that you've stated. It can be very helpful. And again, it's not always fun, but it can be very helpful to receive the kind of feedback that allows you to make the adjustments that are necessary to get back on purpose.
Sure. So we talked a little bit about how we want to define success, and we talked about how creating a personal purpose statement, obviously that's tied to success, because if you're living out your purpose, then you're likely creating the success that you want. We do have a few more people who have shared, and before we move on to the next topic, Greg said success for him is creating a world where everyone is enough, has enough, and contributes their best. Bringing beauty and joy into the world, living simply in relationship to others and the earth, remaining in integrity and fulfillment. And the last one, success for me is doing the best I can every day with what I have available to me at that time. Thank you for that, Mona. So it's powerful to hear people state their definitions of success.
Those are great. And one of the questions that I often get is, does the purpose statement change over time? And my simple answer is yes, it can. I mean, if I go back into my early career, stations, if you will, I wasn't thinking too much. I talk about this in the book. I wasn't thinking too much about my purpose. I was so focused on doing, and on doing based on other models that I had seen. The model that came from my father in his career, the model of other leaders in the organization. And I just thought, without being very purposeful or very deliberate, I'll just try and emulate what I see others doing. Once I, probably in my 30s, really started thinking about this, and it was at an important time in my life where my self-awareness was rising. I really started thinking about the fact that it was important that I not only give this some thought, but that I define something. As I've gotten older and my career has changed and I'm doing different kinds of things, the purpose has probably changed for me. So there's nothing wrong with deciding, 10, 15, 20 years on that maybe your purpose is different. I have the good fortune right now. I just turned 65, and so contemporaries of mine it's very interesting as people retire. A lot of the people that I know are trying to redefine what is their purpose, because if work for a company was their purpose for all those years, now they're saying, what now? What's next?
So are you expecting to shift your purpose, David, as you move into that next phase?
For me, the simple answer is yes, it could change. I'm not retired yet, and I don't have plans to retire formally for some time. But it all depends on what, the journey is and what life hands you. And, 10 years from now, I might decide that I'm much more interested in something else. This book was certainly a reflective kind of activity for me as I turned 60. And I realized that what I had to give back was a reflection of what the book ultimately became. And so that's become a very significant part of the purpose for me. It could change in 10 years.
That's helpful. So let's talk a little bit about these other Success Foundation items, social awareness and self-awareness. How is self-awareness different from social awareness?
The very simple difference is that self-awareness is really a very internal focus, and it's how are you doing? One of the things that I put in the book is that a great way to be really, really fully aware and fully present with yourself is by periodically asking yourself, or even writing the answers down, to two basic questions. Right now I'm thinking, right now I'm feeling. And feeling may be emotional, but it may also be physical. So I talk about self-awareness in the context of, how are you? Are you first of all physically well? Are you tired? Are you mad, glad, sad, surprised? What's your emotional state? And so self-awareness is really about you and where you are and what you know about where you are. Social awareness, on the other hand, is, are you operating consistently with your intent? In other words, do you know what the impact on others is when you say or do something? And so I always talk about the difference between intent and impact in working with others. And maybe this is a good point for just a quick footnote. One of the reasons that the book came into being and the dimensions came into being also is that I really tried hard to think about situations where people totally and completely operate alone. And there just aren't that many examples of that. There may be some, but what I began to realize and looked at in my research was that most of the great accomplishments in our history and in day-to-day life occur when people come together with some sense of a common purpose, and they work together or collaborate to produce a result that benefits someone or something. And so the whole notion of social awareness and all the rest of the differentiators was built on this notion that as we work together, these are all things that help us work together better. But the key answer to social awareness is, are you aware of the impact on others when you say or do something?
That's a very useful definition. And what I'm wondering, David, back to the topic of self-awareness, is why is it difficult to succeed without self-awareness?
Well, in my experience, and everyone can think about their own examples in their own life. One of the things that, again, if we go with this assumption that in most cases people are working with others or around others or they're collaborating with others, it becomes awfully important to have this high level of awareness if you're going to work well with other people. And so the link to success is, in my experience, people can see through facades fairly easy. Over time, if you're not authentic, over time, if you don't listen well, people notice that. And so this whole notion of your own awareness and how you're, one of the ways that I describe it in the book is, how do you show up? And the way that you show up becomes very important to whatever success you're trying to achieve, because others will notice. Does that make sense?
Oh, it definitely does. And for those who are watching, listening, we would love to hear any kind of comments or questions or insights from you along the way as well. I think about even just the self-awareness of when you come to work cranky, and the social awareness coming into play of how is that going to impact the people around you. Not that I ever come to work cranky or anything.
Right, right. Well, there's some interesting, it's funny that so maybe the antithesis of being cranky is, being happy and so forth. There's some interesting research in the book about that we found that the act of people smiling, there's tons and tons of research that suggests the impact that has on others. It influences others' behavior. And if you think about it, the whole notion of smiling seems so simple, but showing up in a happy state. I'm still a work in progress, and I'm still learning all this. But one of my universal sort of mantras is when people, it's a common salutation that people will say, well, hey, hello, how are you? And I always assume that they're genuinely interested in how I am. And my sort of universal mantra is, when somebody says, how are you? I say, terrific. I choose terrific. And I'm also authentic to the degree that if I really were horribly tired or had a bad night or I'm not physically feeling well, without trying to make it, a long diatribe, I'll let people know, I'm pretty good today, a little tired, and I hope to fix that later on tonight. Or I'm pretty good today, but I'm slightly under the weather. because I think that's the authentic response.
Sure. Well, we have a question that came in from Jim on this topic, and he was wondering how we know how we are being perceived, because there may be times that we think we're having a certain impact, but we are not correct. So, David, would you have any insight for Jim and for the rest of us about getting accurate perception, getting an accurate read on other people's perceptions of us?
Sure. I think the simplest way is, and much in the book, I guess I'll just come clean here. The book reflects a lifetime of learning for me and a lifetime of work because I probably started out being kind of a mess. So I had a lot of work to do. But one of the things, a lot of what's in the book is very common sense. I used to say that, what is common sense is not often common practice for people. The simplest way, in answer to your question, is to ask. One of the things that I pay close attention to in my articulation or how I interact with others are language patterns. And so a key example would be for me to state my intent when I'm interacting with someone, and particularly, really importantly, particularly if it's a difficult conversation, I'll state my intent. And so the conversation might go, my intent is to be helpful here. Now let me get some feedback from you. Is what I offered up, did it match my intent? Was the impact on you that it was helpful? Or did you see it as helpful? So really the simplest and quickest way to find out, are you operating with your intent consistent with the impact, is just to ask. And in general, I found that most people are more than willing to answer.
That's a really helpful suggestion. So Denise is wondering if having a high degree of self-awareness means that you are likely to be a more highly effective influencer.
I would say generally yes, because again, if you look at the model, it radiates outward from, starting with purpose and then self-awareness, and self-awareness before social awareness. So I think it does in concert with social awareness. If I'm aware of how I'm doing, and I keep thinking about that intent versus impact, then the social awareness piece of it is, am I having the desired impact on others, and are they getting from me the way that, essentially, how do I want to show up?
Sure. Back to the smiling comment, Gary was wondering whether whether smiles can be genuine or fake. What do you think about that, David?
Well, it caused me to laugh. There was a funny, it was a comedian some years ago who said, now remember, it's really important to be sincere whether you mean it or not. I think that, again, people have fairly good detection systems. And so I think it's important to be authentic. And most people don't like to be around others that are, to use your term, grumpy or grouchy or not.
Oh, I think I said cranky.
Oh, cranky, right. Cranky. Generally, people don't want to be around cranky people. And so I think sometimes it requires work. Sometimes with high self-awareness, you realize, I'm not in the place that I want to be. But a mentor years ago said, you don't have to deal with the hand that you're dealt. You can shuffle and re-deal. And I've always remembered that as a way to say, I can choose terrific, and just as easily, if I'm not in a good space, I can choose to move away from that negative space and move to something that's better.
Maybe some of us in flexible workplaces can choose to work from home if we're feeling too cranky to face our office mates.
That might be a really great choice.
So here's another comment coming in. This is why all the positive people in a workplace are often unrecognized leaders. So that's a really interesting comment, Mona. So if you come to work and you show up in a positive way, you are leading because you're influencing others with that positive attitude, even if you're not recognized as a positional leader.
That's very interesting. And again, in the sense of authenticity, the choices that I make for me, and I think maybe all of us on this webinar, the choices that we each make for ourselves are for ourselves. If you were only doing it to create an impact for somebody else, you might want to look at that motive, because I don't know if it's sustainable. If I think it wears people out to try and put on a facade and show up in a way that is not their authentic self. Frankly, and if you want to call me lazy, I think it's just easier to try and be myself and not have to be something different than what I am.
So authenticity is the easier path. Um, that's interesting. I was thinking about one of the most memorable things I think that has ever been said on a webinar that I've done, and I've done a bunch over the years, was that leaders bring the weather. Have you ever heard that phrase before, David?
I have not, but I love it.
Yeah, I liked it too. And for those of us who are on the call who are leaders, thinking about the fact that you can choose what kind of weather you bring into your workplace.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the other reason it's so easy, I mean, I love quotes, and so the book is liberally scattered with a lot of great quotes that hopefully make points. I believe it was Oscar Wilde who said, be yourself, everyone else is taken. I love that because there again, it's just easier to be yourself. And I remember I tell this story in the book at a very, very early age, probably because I had been dishonest. I was a little boy, and my grandfather said to me, always tell the truth. That way, you never have to remember what you said. And that stuck with me for many, many years.
That is a good one indeed. Well, let's talk for a minute, David, about differentiating yourself. When I read the book, that was something that stood out to me. And obviously, as a marketer, it's something that I've thought about. And I'm thinking that when you talk about differentiating yourself in career, it might be a little bit different than the differentiation I think about with marketing. So why is it so important for people in the workplace to be able to differentiate themselves?
Well, first, let me say that I think it might be very similar to the way you think about differentiation in marketing. And there have been some great books written about this. I think Tom Peters wrote a book called Brand You. When you think about a lot of what I've put in this book, it might be related to personal branding. And so differentiation, it's not meant to imply that, all of life is a competition and you have to be better than someone else. Because the problem with competition potentially is that if you frame what you want to do in the context of you winning, often others have to lose. And I just don't believe that's the way the world works. It seems to me that everyone can win, but the differentiation is really a function of saying, I'm showing up amongst a lot of other people. And if I'm true to my purpose and true to being authentic, do I want some people to see the positive differences between me and others? Now, I think what drove a lot of this, again, in terms of trying to help people out in terms of starting their career and beginning their world of work or their life of work, the notion of differentiation was so that people could recognize it's hard out there due to the sheer numbers of people entering the workforce. And to be your best self, you want others to be able to see you as your best self. And I really feel like some of the things, maybe all of the things, all the dimensions of success are differentiators in that it will allow you to stand out. You'll be memorable for being authentic. You'll be memorable for being a really great listener, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. So here's an interesting question from John. He said, do you encourage individuals to establish personal and professional goals with their spouse or partner? So thinking about, wanting to be conscious of the success that you're seeking in your life, is it a good idea to partner with your partner to come up with goals?
I think yes. I think it's a very personal kind of a choice. And if I think I saw the name come across, and if that's my friend John Bartley, who I worked with a number of years ago. John, delighted to have you on the webinar. If it's a different John Bartley, then welcome. But the wonderful thing, if it happens to be the John Bartley I'm thinking of, is that like so many of the clients, so many of the people that I worked with, I'm sort of an amalgamation of all the things that I learned from them. But getting back to the question, I think it's a very personal choice, but I think the answer is yes, because if you think about making a relationship work, relationships of any kind, whether they're business or a marriage or whatever, they work better if there is harmony within the relationship. So think about something as simple as, your success definition. If two people in a marriage have very different definitions of success, that doesn't mean that the relationship won't work. It just means that it might be a lot more work for both people. with such divergent definitions. So I think it's a great idea to sit down, my wife and I try and periodically, usually around the first of the year, talk about things that they might seem mundane, but it helps to have a conversation to say, if we're going to take a vacation this year, what are the options we want to look at, and can we choose one that both of us feel great about? Because going on a vacation that only one of a couple is excited about is, I think, potentially a design for disaster. There was a wonderful video many, many years ago. It's still around, I think, called the Abilene Paradox, and it was a wonderful story about people who kind of collude out of low self-awareness to make a trip to Abilene on a very hot summer day. And when they go, it's an awful trip, and they come back and they start blaming each other for having made the trip because it was so awful. Hopefully that doesn't happen very often in marriages, but I think back to the question, it's great to be aligned on what do you want, and do you want to set some goals together?
Thanks, David. And yes, it is your friend John Bartley on the call today.
Terrific. Well, say hello to Mary, John.
Here's a really interesting question. David, what would be your suggestion for helping someone who is clearly not operating from a position of authenticity?
Well, again, it starts with self-awareness. How would they know? And so if you're concerned that you're not showing up in an authentic way, there's been a lot of books written about feedback. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. I've always said that allowing people to provide you with feedback, and by the way, it works best when it's asked for, but allowing people to provide you with feedback is the way that you raise your self-awareness, and it's a way for you to identify, is my intent consistent with my impact? And so I really feel as though if you start with a question about, do I show up in an authentic way? There's a great way to find out, are you consistent with the way that you want to show up, which is a function of authenticity. And I tell a story in the book about humor. I learned at an early age that if I entertained people, it fed my ego. If I could make people laugh, it fed my ego. I probably was kind of a pain in the rear for some of my high school teachers, because at times I probably thought that my job was to entertain the rest of the class. When I went through a fairly significant self-awareness process many years ago, I sat through, many on the call may be aware of T groups. I sat through some T groups, and you get a lot of feedback from a lot of people. And the feedback that I consistently got was, we really think Dave's a funny guy, but we don't really know who he is. And so the humor, for some people, the sense was that the humor was masking my real self. They couldn't figure out who I was authentically. And so that's a great example, perhaps, of a strength overused. Humor is nice, it's wonderful, but in the moment when I got all that feedback, I made the choice that while I still want to appreciate humor, I don't want it to come at the expense of my own authenticity.
Sure. Well, there's a little bit of a follow-up from our friend Roger Dean Duncan, who's on the call related to this question, and he's wondering if a lack of authenticity makes it difficult for a person to accept well-intended feedback. So potentially the question was not about what do you do if you're not operating from a place of authenticity, but what about when those you're interacting with are not showing up authentically? What can you do?
And so the question is, can you provide feedback effectively to people who are not authentic? Is that?
I think so. It says, does a lack of authenticity make it difficult for a person to accept well-intentioned feedback? So he says yes.
Yeah. So I absolutely think the answer is yes. And, everyone can think about, do any people come to mind, people that you know in your life, people that are in the news a lot? Does anyone come to mind that seems to always have a front, a persona, and does that seem to go hand in hand with their inability to accept any kind of feedback that might help them become better? And we can all come up with some examples, I think, but yeah, I absolutely think it makes it very difficult. And, without practicing dime store psychology, that usually doesn't work well for individuals. And my thanks to Roger for being on the call and for playing. There will be some lovely parting gifts, Roger.
Yes, and he says, don't get me started about people in the news. Okay, so we have a lot of questions coming in, David, and I think we have shifted to the question and answer portion of this call. Ross is wondering, and hopefully your coworkers are not on the call because I just said your name. Several people I know or work with have no ability to observe themselves in relation to others and their impact on others, essentially zero social awareness. I am becoming more aware of the depth of narcissism in the workplace. And what are your thoughts on lack of social awareness or narcissism and working with others? And what is the approach to addressing people who are oblivious to their negative feedback?
Well, there are several, I guess, thoughts or reactions that I'm having. Number one, let's start with one of the things that I talk about in the book is that if you get clear on your purpose in life, it also allows you to determine, is my purpose consistent with the company or organization with whom I'm working? If I'm clear about my purpose, is this the place for me? Does it match up to the purpose of the organization? And when it doesn't, my advice, and I hope no one on the call decides tomorrow, oh yeah, I'm clearly in the wrong company and I must run out and quit. That's not the intent. But the intent is that it does provide a very thorough, if you have a solid, well thought through purpose, it provides the opportunity for a thorough analysis of what is the level of fit. So I would first of all say, double check that. And if you're finding that you are in an organization where there's a lot of narcissism and there's a lot of low self and social awareness of people, and you're trying to operate according to those dimensions or those principles or virtues, then do some soul searching and find out, is this the place for me? Because there again, it wouldn't mean you couldn't be successful in that organization. It just means that it may wear you out to stay. So that's something. The second piece of it then is, to the degree that you are working in an organization and you'd like to make an impact with others with whom you work, again, with feedback, I find that a good thing, and I learned this many years ago, I find that a good starting point, if you have a sense that you're working with someone who is maybe unaware of the impact they're creating through narcissism or whatever it might be, I think it's perfectly okay to periodically say to an individual, are you open to some feedback? Or I just had an experience with you that, gosh, I'm having a reaction. Or a language pattern that I use is oftentimes is, I'm aware of such and such. And so I might ask someone, are you open to some feedback? Here's what I do a lot of coaching around. When you ask that question, two things to remember. Number one, the other individual gets to choose. And if they say no, or now's not a good time, I really think it's critically important to honor that. And so if somebody says, if I say, are you open to some feedback on this? And it could be even just feedback on something as innocuous as just an idea or a thought. If somebody says, no, not really, I drop it, I let it go. And we'll move on to whatever the next thing is. The other thing is, in even asking, are you open to some feedback? And if somebody says, yeah, I'd love some, remember that they're not obligated to do anything with your feedback. They get to choose what they're going to do. And there again, you have to be okay with the notion that I can provide the feedback. I'm trying to be authentic and provide, my intent is to be helpful. And if they don't want to take it, then I have to honor that as well. I have to let go of my need, because at some point, if I'm needing them to accept and change their behavior according to the feedback, then we've shifted out of the intent where it's designed to be helpful into, this is now about me and feeding my own ego.
That's really useful. So we do have another question related to managers. And if you're a manager, how can you coach people who lack social awareness, or how can you coach people who struggle with social interactions or social awkwardness? What recommendations would you have?
Well, in management, I guess one of the things that I continually think about, and this is a bit of a crusade for me in the consulting work that I do in organizations. I find that a lot of leaders get very focused on the needs of the business and performance, which clearly they should. But I really think that in addition to guiding functions or guiding business results, I think the primary role of a leader is to expand the organizational capacity through building talent and by influencing others. Individual contributors can do great, work that produces transactional kinds of results for a company, and that's all very important. But once you become a leader, I think one of the primary roles is to help build others, help select good people, help those people identify what their career aspirations are, and then help them get there. And along the way, I think that means that they're signing up for coaching. And so when people are operating in that way, a good question for managers to ask, because oftentimes managers see things that are not within the category of self-awareness for the individual or for the direct report. I think it's a great question to say, let's talk a little bit about, using a typical example, let's talk a little bit about the meeting that we had this afternoon and your role in that meeting. Number one, how do you think it went? Number two, did you feel like, the comments you made and what you contributed were consistent with the intent that you wanted? And then I think in a coaching mode, I think it's great for a manager to be able to say, well, I don't think that's the intent that it had or the impact that it had. So let's explore some other options. I think working for managers or leaders or executives, there's sort of an unwritten rule that you're signing up for that leader to try and help develop you. That's part of the role of leadership. And so I think asking a series of questions to help people raise their awareness, and that's a question, by the way, that I've had very good results with. When people are unaware, raising their awareness, and by the way, sometimes the best thing you can do is encourage them to go talk to others and check in and say, hey, I just want to get a perspective. I made some comments in the meeting this afternoon. How did they fall with you, or what was your reaction to them? I don't want the whole focus of people's journey through life to be about everything about receiving feedback, but I do think it's an effective tool periodically.
So on that same topic of feedback, we have a question. How do you deal with an individual who asks for feedback, but then takes it personally instead of as constructive?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and I will. One of the things that I think is a good leverage point there, when somebody says, "I'd really like some feedback," number one, I want to verify that and say, "Well, I'm delighted you're asking. Is this a good time? Are you sure that this is right now, right here? You'd like some feedback?" And if the answer is yes, one of the things that, particularly if it's difficult feedback, I try to stay away from thinking of feedback as either positive or negative. That's the way most people experience it, of course. I got some good feedback. I did a great job on this report. Or I got some bad feedback today. I didn't complete the report in a very solid way. But one of the things that I'll often do if I have to deliver some difficult feedback is I'll preface it by saying, I'm willing to give you the feedback. I think it could be hard for you to hear, and my concern is it may cause you to be defensive, and if that happens, my worry is that it could impact our relationship, number one. Number two, you won't get the benefit of the feedback. And again, I don't have to be right about the feedback, but I think it's coming from a place of data and wanting to help you. The act of saying, my fear is you might become defensive, is a very useful technique for diffusing the possibility of the defensiveness, because now the individual is a little bit on notice that, oh, they're worried that I might get defensive. And my experience, again, has been it reduces the probability that will occur.
That's a useful framing. So maybe that's something that our caller could try next time, talking openly about your fears about delivering feedback. Let's see, so many questions. So this caller is wondering how you can defend the notion when you know you're authentic, but a spouse or business partner says that you are not. So this is a person who perceives themselves to be operating out of authenticity and is getting feedback from someone close that they're not being authentic.
Well, one of the things, and here again, I I came from a place of being so low in self-awareness and social awareness and the skills. And as I said, I'm still a work in progress. So I'm aware that as I offer advice to people, I don't want this to sound like I've figured it all out. I'm 65 and I'm still learning, and I learn a lot every day. But it really, when someone is in the situation that you described, one of the things that's helpful in providing feedback is data or examples. And there again, if someone is open to the feedback and it's a basic disconnect between I think I'm being authentic and others don't see it that way, then examples become helpful. And at the end of the day, too, one of the ways to think about this is authenticity links to believability. If you're showing up in a certain way that positions yourself in a particular way, and it's not believable for others, for most people. Now, Roger's question was a great question. Some people will never be open to feedback, and their egos are so fragile, and they're oftentimes dealing with such levels of insecurity that, number one, they really don't want to hear the feedback. And even if they hear it, they're not going to do anything about it because they've deluded themselves into thinking they are a particular way. However, that means they're ignoring the fact that their intent is not matching your impact. The impact is very different. And so the basic answer is use data and use examples.
So try harder to understand why those people are saying that, ask questions to get more insight into their comments.
Right. Yeah.
So we had a question regarding, some of the conversation where we use the word manager and leader interchangeably. Would you share how you can differentiate between those two or how you define them differently?
Sure. One of the things that is helpful, and by the way, I'm fascinated with how this remains a great topic of conversation in a lot of organizations. And the interesting thing about that is to just think about the many, many volumes that have been written on management and on leadership over the years, and it's still a good, point of conversation in many organizations. Fundamentally, I think if you look at a lot of the research and you look at good examples of effective leadership, leadership at its very most basic level is about influence, and is being a manager about influence? Well, I think the answer is yes. I think that a way that I think about it is I think all managers are probably leaders to the degree they influence others. Not all leaders are managers. And often the way that I try and coach people in organizations is the difference between sort of strategic and tactical. A question that I started asking years ago when working with teams and with executives and leaders is, if you look at the amount of time you spend in your day, by the way, another way to look at this is for leadership teams, for example, look at leadership team meetings. What percentage of the focus or discussion is on tactical things versus on strategic things? So for leaders, are they trying to lead, inspire, and extract great things from other people more than they are doing? And so I separate leading from doing. Leading is, I think, more focused on getting others to rise to their best levels and to produce great results and so forth. Doesn't mean that leaders don't ever do things, but for me, it's the percentage of time you spend trying to influence, inspire, and get great things done through other people versus doing them yourselves. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, and we have a comment from Daryl with a quote from Warren Bennis and Bert Nanas: "Leaders do the right things, managers do things right."
Yeah, I think that's, I remember that. Gosh, Warren Bennis
Since you're a quote guy.
Yeah, one of the giants. So yeah, that's terrific.
So one final question before we move to some exciting opportunities for our callers today, and then also move over to some face-to-face conversation on our after party. So one of the concerns or issues in organizations are trying to fit in. And David, Cynthia is curious how you could tie this with self-awareness and being authentic. How do you
Did you
balance that?
say how
Yeah.
people fit in?
Yes. So how do you balance the desire to fit in an organization with someone also being self-aware and authentic?
Um, well, let me start with the great quality guru, um, Deming, in some of his early work, said the success or failure of any process is determined in the first 18% of the process. And so for me, the answer to that question starts with, is the fit right? Are you in the right organization based on, do you share the same values? Does your purpose align with the purpose of the organization? So in the first 18% of that process, have you done a lot of great work to make sure the fit is right? Assuming the answer is yes, the fit is right, then you can say, gosh, self and social awareness are about trying to fit in, is about doing the work to say, can I influence? This is the way I look at it. So many things in life is about balance, are about balance. Can I work hard to be a good contributor to the mission of the organization? Can I work hard to fit in, which means I have to come halfway? Can I also do my best work to influence the organization in a positive way that's going to allow the organization to be better because of my presence in it? So fitting in becomes that balance of trying to influence where it's needed and perhaps double checking that it's wanted. And secondly, making the adjustments in myself to be a good fit. I've had experiences, ironically, several of them in the last 2 or 3 years, where people were separated from companies, and I was asked a lot of advice about how do we get this done, both from the standpoint of the transactional to also just the messaging part of it. And those are very, very difficult situations. But, if someone is fundamentally a bad fit and they're not fitting in, my experience in a lot of organizations is that they're slow to act on that kind of a situation. And they usually end badly. And so I always encourage, have some of the open dialogue, have some conversations, exchange feedback back and forth, to make sure that you can make the conscious choice that this is salvageable. We're going to be able to make this work. But when someone is fundamentally a bad fit for the organization, I rarely see that it works out well in the end.
Thanks, David. That's helpful. So a few things for those of you who are watching. If you've enjoyed David's comments and would like to learn more, we would encourage you to go to Amazon and buy the book today. In the event that you've already bought and read the book, we would welcome any Amazon reviews. And we will be sending out an email after this call to give you a chance to get a free download. If you are one of the people who has not yet created your personal purpose statement, we put together a short resource that we're going to share with you today so that you can begin to do some work on that. And for those of you who are on the call who want to join David in our after party.
Becky, you may have muted. Oh, there you go.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry about that. So thanks
Becky,
to all of you. Yes.
Becky, can I also offer one thing? Because we've spent so much time talking about self-awareness and so forth, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of the things that we built with this book is an assessment tool. And so there is an online assessment. We are currently, we launched the assessment, we've gathered some great data, and we're working to sort of normalize what the assessment data looks like and to improve it. And so we've got a bit of a work in progress for about the next 3 weeks. But we will be making sure that the website highlights when we're back in business on the assessment. And so there's a wonderful online assessment that you can go and take. The report that you get back provides you with your own profile on the 9 dimensions, and where you rank or rate lower based on your answers, we give you some very specific recommendations on how you can shore those things up. So we feel really great about, the combination of the book and the assessment tool allows people to do a lot in terms of their desires to improve. So I just wanted to mention the assessment.
Okay, perfect. So I guess I was talking before and didn't realize I was still muted. That's a poor self-awareness move on my part. We would encourage those of you who enjoyed today's session to go and buy the book on Amazon, or if you have already read the book, to go ahead and leave an Amazon review, which is always helpful. We will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to this free download, and we would also encourage you, if you can spell David's name, to visit his brand newly launched website, davidenielson.com, to learn more about the work that David is doing in the world. And we are going to sign off here, and then we're going to click over to the after party and talk together. Clara, we are not able to provide the link to the assessment because it is not up and going now, but if you join David's newsletter list, we'll be able to get in touch with you to share about that when it's ready again. So thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing a few of you over on the after party. Take care.
Thank you to
David.
all of you for participating.